Welcome to today's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast, your channel for super easy, no-nonsense advice on how to declutter and organise your home. Please welcome your hosts, professional organisers Ingrid Jansen and Leslie Spellman.
Hello and welcome listeners to episode 86 of the Declutter Hub podcast. I'm Ingrid. In today's episode, I'm talking to Alison Lush, a certified professional organizer from Montreal, Canada, about chronic disorganization. Alison became a professional organizer in 2010, and as she studied, Alison came to realize that she herself was affected by chronic disorganization. Alison is currently the president of ICD, and she is an accomplished and respected international speaker. She has also appeared numerous times on television. Alison loves working with clients affected by chronic disorganization. So, welcome, Alison. I'm so happy you're here.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for the generous invitation. It's an honor to speak with you and your audience.
Thank you very much. Now, we've known each other for about 3.5 years now, but I feel like I've known you forever since we met in Canada only 3.5 years ago, and we've seen each other in the UK here for a conference, but I feel like I've known you forever. We just instantly clicked, didn't we?
I think I felt the same thing. It helps that we met in a conference and we got to spend a lot of time together over the 4 days, and we really got a good chance to know each other right from the get-go. And then we connected instantly online, which we're so lucky to have this possibility to create and maintain relationships online. And then with your volunteer work and my volunteer work, we've had lots of overlap and our interests, our mutual interests, and always wanting to create positive content for people online. So I don't think it's very surprising that we have a lot in common.
I agree. Now, it's very interesting, Alison, because in today's podcast, we're going to talk about chronic disorganization. And our listeners might be thinking, chronic disorganization? What is that? I've heard about clutter. I've heard about decluttering, about organizing. I've heard about hoarding, but I've never heard about chronic disorganization. So I think we should start there. What is chronic disorganization?
Well, I'd be happy to share the official definition with you in a couple of minutes, but I think it might be easier to help your listeners come towards an understanding of what it is if I share a little story with you. So if you allow me, I will share a story with you. It's an analogy.
Please.
If we think about 5 basic resources that we all have to manage in our lives, we manage our money, we manage our space, we manage our belongings, our energy, and our food, for example. Every single one of us is familiar with this. We manage those resources. So if we think about just food, for example, let's just talk about food. How well does someone manage the need for food in their lives? If you take someone, for example, that their status is they're well nourished and they have all the nutrients that they need, they have no food issues like allergies or intolerance, and they're basically healthy. So that's the status of someone, for example, in terms of food. And then if you look at that same person and you say, what kind of a routine might that person have? It's very likely that that person has identified what they need to stay in good health and what they need to eat that makes them feel good on an ongoing basis. And so they've created routines in their life that support that continuing good status, for example. So the routine and the status support the individual, and that leaves the person feeling confident and strong. If they have a healthy status and if they have good routine, they feel healthy and strong and confident. And then you take someone with a completely different status. Take someone who might be missing basic nutrients. Take someone who might have an underlying food issue that they might not even be aware of. Maybe they've already identified it. Maybe they haven't identified it yet. So maybe food is very difficult for this person. They go to a restaurant and they're very uncomfortable with the menu. They don't know what to order because they know from previous experience that it's going to be difficult. So just going to a restaurant could be stressful. If this person is walking down the street and they feel a bit peckish, they want to eat something, they can't necessarily just step into the chippy and just buy some French fries and just feel satisfied like the healthy person might do, because this person has all these underlying issues that make it so that it's complicated. The food issue is complicated. And also the routines of this second individual will be different, because they might be kind of exploring, why is it that I'm not comfortable in a restaurant? Why is it that I get a stomach ache? Why is it that I don't feel satisfied? Why is it that I'm tired all the time? Why is it so complicated for me? And it's not complicated for my spouse or my partner or my friend or my daughter. This is what chronic disorganization feels like. It's mysterious and it's different for every individual. So for example, if we think about how a person manages their clutter, if a person does not experience chronic disorganization and they have a little bit of clutter in their house, maybe they have a backlog or they have a closet that needs decluttering, if it's a person that has a basic, healthy, strong status in terms of managing their belongings, they're going to be able to attack that closet, open that drawer, deal with that pile, because they're going to start with some confidence. They're going to start with some good routines and some basic self-knowledge and understanding, and they can dive in and actually do it and finish it and say, okay, I did it. Now I'm feeling good again. But someone who comes to that closet or backlog with chronic disorganization in their lives, this person is going to have a lack of confidence. They're going to have a history of failed attempts at improving their own situation. They're going to be lacking structure and routines that they might need in order to address this challenge successfully. They might be lacking self-knowledge. Why is it that I struggle so much with decluttering? Why is it that I struggle so much? Everybody else seems to have no difficulty decluttering a closet or a drawer. They just do it and they turn the page and they move on and they feel good. But every time I try, it's so difficult for me. That's like when the person goes to the restaurant and they're confused. Why is it that everybody else is satisfied with this menu and it's so difficult for me? It's because on an individual basis, the person is arriving at the challenge with different routines and status and challenges, basically. Okay, chronic disorganization, which there's three criteria. It persists over a long period of time. So it's not just since the baby was born 2 months ago. It's not just since I moved 6 months ago. We're talking about disorganization that exists for a long time. Second of all, the chronic disorganization frequently undermines quality of life, which means that I'm trying to do things on a daily basis and the disorganization gets in my way on a daily basis. And third, the disorganization recurs despite my repeated self-help attempts. I try to declutter, I try to get organized again and again, and I keep trying, and I just never seem to get on top of it. So that is the official current definition of chronic disorganization according to the Institute for Challenging Disorganization. So what does it feel like to be living with chronic disorganization? It feels uncomfortable. That's the easiest word to say for starters. It feels very uncomfortable. People frequently feel frustrated. They try and try to improve their situation and they don't seem to feel that they're making progress. So they're frustrated because they keep investing effort and energy and time and they don't feel they're making progress. People can feel that it's unfair. Why is it so hard for me? And it doesn't seem to be hard for the person next to me. So it can feel very unfair. It can feel very confusing because I'm doing everything that they told me to do. I'm following all the suggestions and it's not working for me. So it can feel very confusing. It can feel mysterious for the same reason. It can also feel frightening because I'm following all the instructions. I'm doing everything that everyone is saying. I bought all the books. I bought what I think are all the right containers and everything. And yet I just don't seem to be getting a handle on it. So I'm investing all this time and energy and I'm not getting any results. That can feel frightening for a person. And then there's also the aspect where sometimes other people look at us or point at us and they go, why aren't you picking up after yourself? Why is your home so untidy or so disorganized? So there can be an aspect of blame or shame involved. People can feel embarrassed. People can feel there's something wrong with me because I can't manage to get this under control and other people seem to be managing. So I feel embarrassed or shameful, and sometimes other people judge us, and so we feel we're being blamed and shamed from other people, and that's a very heavy thing to be living with and dealing with. So that's a little bit of like what it feels like. Haven't talked yet about what it looks like, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to jump in case I need to clarify anything or in case you have questions about what I've said so far, Ingrid.
Yes, for sure. First of all, because in the bio, when I introduced you, I said that when you were studying to become a professional organizer, you came to realize yourself that you were affected by chronic disorganization. So all the things you've just been describing into how does it feel like, I'm sure you can relate to them because you were there.
I was there and I am still there, to be perfectly frank, not to scare people off, but I think it's important to be very honest. I believe in being frank with people. Mm-hmm. So when I discovered professional organizing 10 years ago, and I started taking classes to become a professional organizer, because I do have very strong innate organizing ability, I started taking all these classes and I started looking around more critically at my own environment and my own belongings. And I came to the understanding that looking around me, there was actually quite a lot of clutter and much more volume of belongings than would be recommended. And I started understanding better the consequences of all of this around me. I became more sensitive. Before we went on air, you were telling me about feedback that you get from people in the membership of the Decluttering Hub, and how so many people tell you that when they're in this membership, that they end up developing more understanding about the power of clutter and the relationship they have with their things and the value of learning about these things and getting a handle on it. Well, it's a learning curve. It takes a while and it's a personal journey because everybody is starting from a different place and everybody has different resources. So they're going to advance at a different speed and et cetera. So I started 10 years ago, and what I came to the conclusion, what I learned over time is I had some notions that were unhelpful, some beliefs that I should be living a certain way. And so I was bringing certain items into my home because I thought that I should be having these kinds of items in my home. I realized that to a certain extent, shopping for me was a soothing activity. It made me feel like I wasn't hard done by financially, that I didn't have financial challenges. If I could bring home 2 or 3 bags from the charity shop, then I don't have a problem with money. I'm not poor. I think that's a very, very common reaction for people. And often people who feel that they're struggling with money want to bring home bags of things because it feels a bit reassuring. And I was doing a lot of that. So I was filling up my home unnecessarily with volume and volume and volume. I did not have any notion about the impact of the size of a collection. So we all have collections in our homes. You have a collection of books and a collection of tools and a collection of clothes, etc. I did not have a notion of the importance of keeping limits on those collections. So they just spread and spread and spread. And I did not realize how the negative impact, the cost to me and my family because of that lack. So there were a number of different issues for me that I identified over the years, and I made tremendous progress. So for example, now I do not bring home too much stuff. I do not shop unnecessarily in order to make myself feel better. I have learned and understood and modified my behavior, and the volume of things in my home is very reasonable now. You could come into my home in 5 minutes. I would not feel the need to run around and hide things or make it company ready. So that's completely different from before. But there are still some things I struggle with. It's been 10 years now, and there are a couple of categories that are still difficult for me to manage. I still struggle with time management, and when there is a big challenge in my life, a new demand on my time that occurs, I sometimes find myself becoming overwhelmed all over again, like I did a number of years ago. So chronic disorganization does not go away overnight. We can develop skills and routines and self-knowledge, and we can talk about that later in the conversation. But it starts with self-knowledge, I think, and the recognition that it's okay that it's different for me than for someone else. Getting back to the analogy of food, it's like saying, okay, maybe I have a lactose intolerance, or maybe I have a vitamin D deficiency, or maybe I don't like eating mushrooms, so I have to make adjustments in what I eat in order to feel good. It's the same thing with our belongings and our management of our space and our time. If I understand myself better, I can make the good choices for me so that I can manage my resources best for me, and it'll make me feel better on a daily basis.
So interesting. It's so interesting. I find it so interesting.
I think that the easiest way to describe what does it look like, I will give you two images.
Mm-hmm.
And one image is, because I'm a professional organizer, so I'm going to describe what it could look like if I walk into someone's home and I get to meet them and I come to the conclusion that they are affected by chronic disorganization. And I will also draw you a picture of what it would look like in comparison, a person who I come to the conclusion they are not affected by chronic disorganization, because I think holding those two images up side by side is going to help people understand.
Okay,
so
cool.
If I go and meet a person and they take me on a tour of their house and they describe what their challenges are, and they're wanting to hire me as a professional organizer, and the first thing we do is we take a tour of the apartment or the home, and I say, just talk to me, just tell me about this space, tell me what makes you feel good, and tell me what doesn't make you feel good. And so they'll say, okay, this whole shelving unit here, I have no problem with it. It's not a problem. And it works for me. It's no problem. This thing over here, this box over here, this really bothers me. I don't know what to do with this box. It's a problem for me. I'm stuck. This drawer over here, it's a problem for me. This cupboard over here, it's fine. I don't have a problem with it. And as we go through the home, what I try to do is this is important. This took me a couple of years to figure out. In a sense, I try not to get overwhelmed by what I'm seeing, because it can be very misleading. I could be seeing things that look very tidy, but underlying there could be something else. I could see things that look very cluttered, but actually it's working well for the person. So I consider the most important information that the client is telling me is how do they feel about it. So if a person says, I feel good about this, I say, okay, they don't need my help. It's working for them. I trust what they say. It's working for me. It's not a problem. If the person says, this is a problem for me, it doesn't matter what it looks like. They're telling me it's a problem for them. Therefore, we're going to work on it. So if I go into a person's home and most of the home, they say, I don't have a problem. 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 But the kitchen, and they've hired me for the kitchen, and that's the only area that's really bothering them, and it's just the kitchen and everything else is fine, I would probably come to the conclusion that this is not a person affected by chronic disorganization, because they have already figured out systems that work for them in their office and in their clothing and in their bedroom and in their front hallway and in their basement and in their storage, etc. They don't need me for all that stuff. They obviously have the skills and the understanding in order to manage most of their life. They just have this one area where they're stuck for whatever reason. So that's probably not a situation where there's any chronic disorganization. So that's one person. The other individual, if I go into their home and we do a tour, they show me the front hall closet, and there's going to be probably some clutter. They're going to show me the kitchen, and there's going to be some discomfort and confusion, and I'm stuck here and I don't know what to do there. They're going to show me the bedroom, and there's going to be issues. They're going to show me the papers, and probably there's going to be issues. They're going to show me the basement. There's probably going to be issues. Basically, most of the zones in the house are probably going to have issues of discomfort and confusion. And one of the things that I've come to understand is that one of the reasons why it may be everywhere, the issues, is because people who experience chronic disorganization frequently struggle with boundaries. So for example, a person, you might keep all of your books in a bookshelf. You might keep all of your books in a bookshelf, and you might put them all away in the bookshelf, and therefore there's no issue. But a person who experiences chronic disorganization might not have that same comprehension of the container of the bookshelf and the value of always putting the books away in the bookshelf. They might have looser boundaries, and they might leave books lying around or store them on a windowsill or something and not understand the consequences of how that creates clutter and how it blurs the lines and it affects other areas. So when I'm doing the tour of the house, what I'm going to see with someone affected by chronic disorganization is lots of overlap. So there's going to be clothes where I wouldn't normally expect to see clothes. I'm going to see books where I wouldn't normally, and it's all kind of mixed up and unclear. And the person is telling me that they're feeling overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. So there's a general feeling of chaos a little bit and confusion. I don't know what to do. And this is important to me here, but I don't understand why. So that's a visual image of what the two homes might look like and what the client would report to me.
Okay. So one professional organizer to the other. I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I think our listeners will be interested in this. What you're describing is kind of a chaotic home.
Uh-huh.
So would people from the outside possibly think this person is maybe a person with a hoarding disorder because it looks very chaotic and possibly a lot of stuff in the wrong place? So what then, if you please can enlighten us, is the difference between a person who is struggling with hoarding disorder and a person who's got chronic disorganization? I'm sure there is a little bit of overlap, but I can very clearly understand how you're explaining this to me. But if our listeners are not thinking to them, but that sounds like a hoarded house.
Mm-hmm.
So can you shed some light on that, Alison? Because I think that will be very interesting for our listeners.
Well, I'm very grateful that you're asking this question, Ingrid, because I think it's hugely important that when we start talking about chronic disorganization, that we do differentiate the difference between chronic disorganization and hoarding, because there is overlap. You are absolutely correct, but there's also tremendous differentiation between the two. First thing is, chronic disorganization is a description of an environment. My home has chronic disorganization. I am affected by chronic disorganization. It's not a diagnosis on me. I am not, we always try to avoid, in my world, we try to avoid saying a person is chronically disorganized, because that's putting a label on the individual, and that's hard to escape. So I talk about my clients as a client who is affected by chronic disorganization. So that's one thing. It separates the issue from the individual. Secondly, hoarding disorder is a mental health disorder that is identified in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. In 2013, it was diagnosed on its own right as a mental health disorder with specific criteria that psychiatrists, specially trained psychiatrists, will use in order to identify if an individual is affected by hoarding disorder. I'm a professional organizer. I specialize in chronic disorganization. I do not have the right to walk into a home and say to a person, or even to myself, you are experiencing hoarding disorder. I don't have the right to diagnose that. Only a trained mental health professional has the right. So it's a very different thing. That's one thing. Second of all, when I'm working with people and I go into their homes and it looks kind of chaotic, and I come to the conclusion this is probably chronic disorganization, what I'm seeing and hearing, I do ask myself, is it possible that there's some hoarding disorder going on here as well? I ask myself the question. And the way that I have come to be able to differentiate, it's a very simplistic test, but it's a very helpful test. First of all, let's say that I work with a client for an hour and we've created 2 bags for charity that the client says, I don't need those clothes or those books anymore. Here, they're in bags. Let's put them by the door. Yes, they can go. As I'm walking out the door, I can say to the client, would you like me to drop those off at the charity shop for you? If the client responds and says, oh, that would be such a big help. Thank you so much. Yes, please get them out of here. That to me says the person was experiencing chronic disorganization. They were confused. They were overwhelmed. I've helped them clarify things. They're happy for the excess clutter to go out the door because they've made the choices on the individual items. A person who might be affected by hoarding disorder will see those 2 bags by the door, and they will have probably tremendous difficulty to let those bags go. They will really not want me to walk out the door. They will say to them, it'll feel a tremendous discomfort, almost like painful. And they will think of me walking out the door with those 2 bags, and they will say, no, it's okay. I'll drop them off. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And frequently what happens is I come back the next week and those 2 bags are still sitting there. Or the client has taken the 2 bags and hidden them in a closet somewhere so that I wouldn't even see them. Because the person is struggling with a different nature of challenge. It's much more severe, and it's based in mental health issues, and it comes from a background, and it's much more complex, and that's not my specialty. My specialty is working with people who experience chronic disorganization, and there's a lot that we can do to help these folks.
Absolutely brilliantly explained, Alison. And I think that will help a lot of our listeners as well, who are listening to this podcast and thinking, gosh, I do have some stuff, and wow, and how do I deal with it? And I think that has explained in very clear terms. And yes, we both know there is so much involved with hoarding and chronic disorganization, but we need to make sure that our listeners get on board and understand what we're talking about as well. But I think that is really helpful. So thank you so much. Okay, so going back then to chronic disorganization, why are we even talking about this? I mean, did we even know this was a thing?
Well, I would say that we're talking about it for the exact same reason that you and Leslie created the Declutter Hub. It's the exact same question. It's the exact same answer. Why did you create it? You created it because you recognize that when people live with clutter and chaos in their homes, that it affects their well-being, it affects their efficiency, it affects their finances, it affects their ability to do what they want in life, it affects their self-esteem, it affects their relationships, it affects their time management, it affects everything. The way we manage our belongings affects every part of our lives. And chronic disorganization, all it is an identification, if you will, of people who are trying to address these very real issues, but they have additional challenges. So it's like they're hungry, they want to go to the restaurant, they want to have dinner just like everybody else because we all need to eat, but it's just harder to go to a restaurant and find something on the menu that we can eat that will satisfy us and meet our nutritional needs because we arrive with these additional challenges, let's say. So it's all about supporting our life, trying to accomplish what we need in life. I like to think of our belongings. The only reason that they are in my home is because they give something to my life. They add value to my life. They help me accomplish what I want in my life. If it's stored in a way that I can find it, if it's things that I have actually evaluated and I've decided they give me value, then they should stay. And everything else is just extra, and it's in the way. And that's exactly, I believe, the same mentality that the Declutter Hub has. It's keep the things that serve you. There's no judgment about how much it should be. You decide what's good for you. It's your home. You're the expert in your own home. It's the exact same thing for people with chronic disorganization. It's just that they need a little bit more help.
Well, thank you, Alison. That is completely true. And that's why one of the reasons why Leslie and I set up the Declutter Hub, we realized that people needed help. And there's lots of people who can't have a professional organizer in their house, and we just wanted to be there online for them. And that's why we have the videos and the quick wins, and we've got the checklists, and we've got a live Q&A every other week where our members can ask us questions. So listeners, if you're listening to this and think, you know what, I would love to be a part of the Declutter Hub membership, have a look on members.declutterhub.com for more information, and you can read all about it, what we do and why we love it so much. Okay. Can you give me, because we have so much to talk about. I realized when preparing this podcast, I'm thinking to myself, you know what, this is so interesting. I want to talk to Alison some more. So we've actually decided to do a second podcast. So I'm now going to ask the closing question for this podcast, but I'm already assuring you that we are going to come back with part number 2, and we're going to record it with Alison because I want to know far more, because I think it's very, very interesting. So then the closing question for this podcast: what kind of factors may contribute to chronic disorganization?
Well, that's a very interesting and important question, Ingrid. I'm so glad you asked it. The Institute for Challenging Disorganization has a fact sheet available for free to the public for download. And I've got it on my screen right now in front of my face just to give you and be able to refer to it. But it is available to the public for free. So if you're interested in what I'm going to tell you, you're very welcome to go to the website challengingdisorganization.org. disorganization.org in the resources section, and you can download this. It's fact sheet number 4. So what this fact sheet refers to is there's a list of, I don't know how many items are on this list. There might be, I don't know, 80 items, 100 items on this list. There's a lot of items on this list that have been identified as factors that may contribute to chronic disorganization. So it's divided into 3 categories. One category are brain-based conditions. So for example, if someone is affected by ADHD or multiple sclerosis or depression or an addiction of some kind, or obsessive compulsive disorder or hoarding disorder, or decision-making difficulty, or memory deficits, or dyslexia. There are so many different neurologically based conditions that can result in having more disorganization in life. The second category is called beliefs about yourself and your possessions. So perfectionism is something that's very, very common when we're looking at clutter. Many people are affected by a notion of perfectionism. Another belief about ourselves and our possessions would be attachments to our possessions, or beliefs and attitudes, or ineffective beliefs about our possessions. And the third category are what we call situational factors. So if someone has physical challenges like impaired mobility, or if a person is going through a life crisis, or if a person is lacking skills, or the person's going through a transition, there's many, many on that list, situational factors which can contribute to disorganization. And this might sound like an awful lot, and people might feel like a little bit overwhelmed by the reference to all of these different items. Quite frankly, when I look at this list, and I went through it with a fine-tooth comb and I identified the specific items that I feel apply in my situation, I felt tremendous relief. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt relieved, and I felt it like a mystery had been solved. And I felt validated. And then I realized, now that I understand what some of the underlying factors are, now I can do something about it. And I think that that's like a perfect segue for the second part of our interview, where we're going to be talking about strategies and what we can do about it. So this document is a very powerful tool that people can use to get started along that path.
Are you happy for me to share the link in the show notes to this fact sheet, Alison?
Absolutely, for sure.
The challengingdisorganization.org resources. I will put it all in the show notes. So
Wonderful.
if you're driving around listening to this podcast, or if you're with your shopping trolley somewhere and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have anything to write this down, don't worry. I'll put it in the show notes on the website of the declutterhub.com. And I will also definitely put all Alison's social media links in there. But I will make sure to put this in. I do a big arrow and a cross on my sheet now, so I don't forget to put that in, so you can at your own leisure just have a little look through if you think about that. And yes, I agree with you. What a perfect way to close this podcast and kind of say, okay, we've now got the definition. We know how it feels like. What's the difference between people who are affected and not affected with chronic disorganization, and what kind of factors contribute to that? So I love it. I love it that we're now going to do a part 2, strategies and what can you do. So Alison, if our listeners, I know you love social media, you are everywhere. So I'm going to include all of your links. What would you like our listeners to find out most? If they can only do 1 or 2 things on social media, what would you like them to find, or where to have a look?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I would say that the 2 platforms where I pay the most attention to adding content are my professional Facebook page. So it's Alison Lush, Certified Professional Organizer. And the other is my YouTube channel, which is, I've got some very good videos there, both in English and in French, with some very original content, let's say. Just leave it like that.
Oh, you're giving us like a little, like a hook now that we want to have a look. That's good. That's very good. Yes, because of course you're from Canada, but you organize both in French and in English, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and you are also a trainer in both French and English, aren't you as well? Master trainer as
Yes,
well.
I am.
Yes, we have good people here as guests on the podcast, listeners. We only invite the best of the best on the show to chat to you. So, listeners, I hope you have learned a lot today and that Alison's insights have been helpful for you. And yes, don't worry, we're going to put all of the links up and the fact sheet definitely as well. So thanks for taking the time to listen today. Alison, thank you so much. And I'm already looking forward to recording part 2 with you.
It's been a tremendous honor to be here. I really appreciate you making space for this conversation, Ingrid. And I hope that your listeners who this is an issue for will feel that they're getting some clarity and some support in this area, on top of all the support that you and Leslie offer on an ongoing basis.
Well, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, absolutely. So, listeners, if you'd like to get more tips and advice, please follow the Declutter Hub on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as @Declutter Hub, and we've got such a lovely Facebook group called the Declutter Hub Community. So come and find us there. And yes, don't forget our members area. If you'd like to know more, have a look at members.declutterhub.com and to find out more about our courses, our live Q&As, and our membership community. If you don't want to miss the next weekly episode, subscribe to the Declutter Hub podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher, and it will pop into your notifications each Friday. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast. Check out declutterhub.com for more inspiration and don't forget to tune in next week.